Great. I think it is 1:05 Pacific time. I don't know who's joining us on the East Coast, but welcome. We're going to start right now and with our Chinatown Quarter Study webinar, as so many of you have RSVP'd on our registration earlier. Thank you so much. It's going to be a pretty intensive presentation today, but we're really looking forward to, I think, sharing a lot of our methodology and our findings as well. So really excited to share that all with you. And we are doing it webinar style, so please feel free to drop in any comments, any questions, any chats in the comments, and either Chrissy or myself will respond. So just first making sure everybody can hear me properly. Yes. Yes, excellent. And the recording will be saved. There should already be, yes, it is already being saved to the cloud. Shout out to the cloud. Yeah, so again, thank you all for being here today. My name is Amy. I use they and she pronouns. I'm a senior planner at Chinatown Community Development Center, and I think we have either met quite a few folks here from our various travels and all of our other research that we've done before. My coworker, who's also going to be presenting today, is Christy, and she is the planner at CCDC. So as we are beginning our presentation, we just wanted to know who else is in the room. And it would be great if you could also introduce yourselves, say your name, your pronouns, and also where you're tuning in from today, just to see who else is here, because I think there's a variety of different folks from different places. So as you're all doing that, just wanted to say thank you for being here. This has been a big project that has lasted almost 2 years. It's been just under 2 years, and it's involved a lot of funding, a lot of resources, a lot of travel and conversations with folks, and has just been such an enormous project that we are so excited to be completed with, at least in this phase. There is a phase 2, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But in all, we're just really excited to be able to share all these findings with you today. So thank you. So to start, oh, computer is moving a little slowly today. So to start, for the agenda for today, we're going to go over the purpose and the goals of the quarter study. We're going to talk a little bit about who's joined us on all of our various, particularly the research trips, and also members of the research team. We're going to talk a little bit about the background and the context, the methodology and our findings, and also the compilation of our proposals, which is one of the big reasons why we did this quarter study. And finally, our research takeaways and our publicity and our next steps. So just wanted to set the stage for you. So many of the folks who are here have done so much work and have done so much community development work, not just in San Francisco or in a Chinatown, but in a lot of cities across North America and maybe even around the world. I'm not sure who's here, but just wanted to hear. It would be so great to read and see some of your experiences and responses in the chat, because I wanted to ask you all just what have been your experiences in your city's Chinatown, whether it's a city that you've grown up in, or it's a city that you currently live in, or a city you work in. Want to know about what have been the experiences in those Chinatowns, and also what other Chinatowns have you been to? And do you think that there is still a lot of residents in those Chinatowns, or do you think there's still some more tourists there? Who do you think actually go to these communities? Looking to see quite a few people. Excuse me, just looking in the chat and seeing a lot of folks from different places, which is really cool. And seeing Helen say that she's visited San Francisco and Seattle, or she's been to San Francisco and Seattle and has visited Vancouver, Chicago, and New York, which is actually overlaps quite a lot with the ones that we also went to. San Francisco and Seattle. So a lot of different places. Oh, and have visited Vancouver, Chicago, and New York. Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of overlaps here, and I think hopefully a lot of you will take away some kind of reflections, and some reflections on all these Chinatowns that you've been to before, and also ones that you might go to in the future, and the ones that you're currently experiencing and go to now. So the purpose of the Chinatown Corridor study is it was really this in-depth analysis that was cataloging, analyzing, and researching all these various policies, ideas, and programs that would really protect the neighborhood serving nature of Stockton Street Corridor, which is one of the roads that we have in our Chinatown, as well as exploring new experiences and directions for the Grant Avenue corridor and its tourist serving nature. And all of this we wanted to do while remaining faithful to the 1987 Chinatown plan, which really laid out a lot of the technical and a lot of the ideas that the community had in order to keep it the strong neighborhood that it was back then. The actual goals for the corridor study was that first one, summarizing and synthesizing those existing research and policies written and conducted on San Francisco's Chinatown. It also involved the analysis of existing economic development strategies and experiences from other Chinatowns across the continent. And it also involved conducting outreach and focus groups with grassroots stakeholders and proposing potential ideas with them on the future of Chinatown. And finally, it also had all these mapping and cataloging work that we had to do, which included mapping and cataloging assets, including commercial, transit, and cultural assets. And finally, writing and creating that report that summarized the research, the focus groups, the analysis, and the mapping. And so the team, half of the team is here today. So it's myself and Christy. And then we also had Irene, who is a community organizer and did a lot of the interpretation and translation for a lot of the folks that we talked to, both in our focus groups and also when we went to some of the various cities where folks were monolingual, our conversations with those folks as well. And also Rosa, who is the director of planning and policy. So the background and context for just setting the stage about what Chinatown looks like in San Francisco, because a lot of folks, as we've seen in the chat, are not necessarily from the Bay Area. So what Chinatown looks like is the area median income of the community is just over $32,000, which is completely bananas when you consider it to the area median income of San Francisco, which is almost $100,000 more. And it speaks both to that extreme divide between folks at the bottom and the top ends of the spectrum, and also how many of the folks living in Chinatown are earning way, way, way what you need to really survive in San Francisco. Almost a third of these residents are living beneath the federal poverty level, which is much higher than 11.5% of folks living below the federal poverty level in 2022 per the census. So I think it really tells you about the nature of this community. And obviously looking as well at the racial demographics in Chinatown, the majority of the folks who live here are Asian, and followed by, we have about 9% of a white population and also Black or African American, and some Latinx folks at around 3% of the population in the community. And so the other big context of this study is telling you, because this is called the Chinatown Corridor Study, we did want to focus on two of the corridors in the community, Stockton Street and Grant Avenue. And if you look at any of the photos that are here, you can see there's some differences or there's some very distinctive visual qualities to both of them. And the study's ultimate purpose is to really determine proposals that would best uplift Grant Avenue as this tourist-facing corridor, while also continuing to protect Stockton Street as a resident-centered one. So you can look at these I was going to say four, but it's not really four. It's multiple photos that were taken at various points over the past 10 years. And some were taken before COVID-19 and some were taken in 2021, so a year after the pandemic really started. And maybe you can take a guess as to which ones were taken maybe before COVID and which ones were taken in the peak of COVID as well. So as seen above, on like these three photos of these three stores on Grant Avenue, Grant Avenue is the street with the majority of these tourist-oriented stores and businesses that has these trinkets, these gift shops, these jewelry stores, and also some restaurants. But it's also really clear that you can see from like the lanterns and some other lanterns and some of the little fun little street elements in the street that it's really oriented towards tourists. So folks who aren't necessarily living in the community. And on Stockton, as you'll see in the two photos on the right, you can see that there are a lot of grocery stores, there are a lot of wet markets, dried goods stores, a lot of restaurants that are specifically oriented around the community. And when you walk down Stockton, as I think anyone here has, you'll see that a lot of folks who actually frequent these stores are people who are residents, people who maybe, even if they don't still live in Chinatown, they might live in other neighborhoods like the Sunset or the Richmond and still be commuting in to come come access resources, come grab culturally appropriate groceries. And a lot of the major transit lines also cross through Stockton Street. So I think it really tells you who it is that actually uses these two corridors and differences between them. And so beginning with our methodology and our findings, so for our research methodology, and the reason why I think this entire report really took 2 years is we split it into four distinct sections. And the first is doing this historic document analysis, which involved us looking through a variety of different reports. There were those that were written by folks internally to CCDC, but also folks externally from places like UC Berkeley and also the city and other consultants. And then we had our focus group, oh, not focus group, sorry. We had our travel case studies of 5 different cities, not necessarily 5 different Chinatowns, which we'll talk to in a little bit more detail a little later. And then also the focus groups, which involved a lot of really in-depth conversations with folks in the community, a lot of big stakeholders, and then finally ending with a community engagement portion with folks just on the street. Oops. Wow, that was a really fast forward. So our first component was this historic document analysis with considering how old Chinatown is, just over almost 100 years old. There's been a lot of documentation, reports, analyses that have been written about the community. And a lot of these reports have been written by various types of organizations and have touched on various types of the community. So we're looking at, for example, this one in the middle was this Chinatown report that was written by UC Berkeley, and they specifically did an in-depth analysis on the history and the context of what was already going on here. And some of the other documents that we see here as an example are those that were written by other externally facing organizations, but also some city organizations and those relating to the city, like the Chinatown Alleyway Master Plan. And our intention in reading these historic document analyses is we wanted to know about what have been the programmatic proposals that have been put forth by other organizations, by folks internal to CCDC, by folks in other groups represented in Chinatown, because we wanted to collect all of them and see what has actually been implemented and see what hasn't been implemented. It's just as a way for us also to take stock of everything that's come before us as well. Next, which might have been the reason why we met a lot of the folks maybe here on the call today, is our travel to these 5 different case study cities. So we went to, as you can see on the map, really was, as Chrissy has said before, a journey from the west to the east. So we started in Vancouver, and then we went to Chicago, and then we went to Philadelphia and New York. We did that in one trip. And then also finally, we went to Boston. So in Vancouver, we met with a lot of different organizations, different organizers, staffers, and they included the City of Vancouver, academic researchers, and also Chinatown community-based organizations. And Vancouver was really interesting because they just recently elected their first Chinese Canadian mayor. And many organizations that we spoke to actually compared what was happening in Vancouver as something very similar to what was happening in San Francisco's history like 50 or 40 years ago. And what was really different that we noticed in this one, the only Canadian city we went to, was that there are very few people still living in the community. So that made the dynamics of who was there and what the economic development in the neighborhood was very different than what was in San Francisco. And also most interesting was in Vancouver, they were still seeking the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation, which is very interesting. Next, we went to Chicago, which was called the only growing Chinatown in North America. And there we met with other Chinatown-based community organizations and other organizations as well, like the Puerto Rican Cultural Center and also the National Public Housing Museum. And it grew, the Chinatown has been growing, the community has been growing primarily towards southwest suburbs, to the Midway Airport, and also to the Archer bus route. And we could see a lot of seniors actually riding this bus route from the suburbs back into Chinatown, which is a pattern that we see in a lot of different communities and neighborhoods like this. And then also we noticed that there was kind of a lack of zoning controls like in SF that made it possible for a lot of commercial chains to overtake small businesses in the community. So these businesses included hot pots that you might see in Asia and also some boba stores and also small restaurants. And this is also something, like I mentioned, that was seen in a lot of other different Chinatowns. Next, we went to Philadelphia, where we visited with a lot of arts, tenant organizing, and community development organizations in Philadelphia. And in Philly, I think I saw in the comments that folks have had some experience with Philly as well. There's this enormous history of power building and organizing against gentrifying developments, and that includes the Philly Stadium, the casino, and the current fight right now, which I think a lot of folks here have probably heard about, the 76ers arena. And there have been a lot of changes in migration and, demographics lately that have led to shifts in who is living in the Chinatown. So, for example, when we talked to some of the community development folks, they spoke about how it seems like a lot of the residents in the community are now leaning younger and in smaller households, the ones that they did, than the ones that maybe did like a few decades ago, and how many of these residents or these current residents are being pushed out of Chinatown to are coming into Philadelphia because they're being pushed out of more expensive locations like New York. And so I mentioned before something about how there were a lot of Chinese Americans or Asian Americans who were moving out into the suburbs. And so there are a lot of Asian Americans living in the suburbs who, like I mentioned, still visit the Chinatown. And there are a lot of these local city bus lines that still run to Chinatown. And also, we noted too that it was really interesting how regionally, because Newark and Philadelphia and even Boston, a lot of the other East Coast cities are very close together. There are these developments of these private buses that would run lines through all the different communities in each of these different cities in the Northeast. Next, we went to New York City, and this is the big reason why I didn't say we went to 5 different Chinatowns. New York City is home to 9 different Chinatowns, and we visited 3 of them. So we went to Sunset Park in Brooklyn, Flushing in Queens, and in Manhattan, and each have very different migration histories and patterns. Manhattan was, when we were making our observations and having conversations with folks, we really noted that Manhattan seemed to be kind of like that tourist base, kind of like what we saw in Grant Avenue in San Francisco. Queens is very much that transit hub, and Brooklyn's going to be much more of that suburban location for a lot of like locals to settle into. And many of the community organizations we visited, they really focused on the social services of their offerings. They talked about senior care and wanting to have like childcare and really highlighting the importance of wraparound services. And also, visitors and residents were really reliant on transit and both on the main subway stations in each of their communities and also these connecting bus lines between them. And finally, we went to Boston, and I saw, I think, a few folks in Boston here, met with several Boston Chinatown-based organizations, as well as some city staff members, some photos here below. And we noted that the city was looking at historical landmark designation through the state and also through cultural district designation through the city. And a lot of this like cultural historic designation is something that came up in a lot of the different communities that we went to, and it's something that continues to come up as well in San Francisco. And also, very similar to Philadelphia, to San Francisco, it has that community history of advocacy. And in Boston, it really manifested against Tufts University Medical School, which took over and was threatening to displace a lot of the community in Chinatown. And a lot of the community-based organizations we met with really strived to maintain their affordable housing stock at 50%, though they had a lot of international students who were kind of moving in. And noting that as well, a lot of the CBOs were noticing how a lot of the community were starting to move out. And so they were also starting to move their social services towards Quincy and Malden, where more of the suburban Chinese American communities lived. So just some like very basic key themes or just things that we noticed between all of them when we visited all these different cities and these communities, as we saw between all these different Chinatowns, there was this history of organizing and building power against displacement. And there was also a lot of use, although there's a lot of discourse around how effective a lot of these plans and um, there's a lot of use around these. There's a lot of use of the zoning, planning, master plans, documents around these technical documents using these communities as way to, I think, like maintain and protect a lot of the communities, but really jury was still out on how effective they were in each of the communities. There was also a lot of questions around Chinatown's continued relevance to rising ethnoburbs or rising suburbs, these suburbs that have large communities of Chinese American populations. You can see them in places like the Bay Area and in LA, even in a lot of the other cities that we spoke to. There was always this existential question of, is there still a point to having a Chinatown if there are these communities in the exurbs and the suburbs where they have a lot of the similar resources, a lot of the similar social services, grocery stores that might be in Chinatown? There was also the important theme of culture and home and services, food and drink. Like what type of hub is a Chinatown? Like, is it just a hub just for these social services or for these important culturally appropriate grocery stores? But is there also an element where it becomes like this hub or this home base, for example, for more recent migrants, more recent international students who are here and are looking for those more like modern boba places or bubble tea stores? And finally, something I alluded to already was that question of like, what is the role of cultural and survivor? Culture in survivor, in survival. Sorry, thinking about the show apparently too much. But what is the role of culture in survival? What kind of survival tools are there? What kind of like cultural tools are there in terms of is there a desire from some communities to use places or tools like the UNESCO World Heritage Site or to use cultural heritage districts like what you might see in San Francisco. And so I bring up all these themes not necessarily because they're answers to what each of these different communities are doing, but I bring them up almost as more questions to think about because these were questions that came up as we traveled to all these different Chinatowns. What we also did in our methodology, our third part of our research was also having, our third and fourth part of our research is having these focus groups and also community engagements. So with our focus groups, we talked to 35 different individuals that we identified in 13 distinct groups. These stakeholder groups included merchant associations, like grassroots organizing groups, restaurant owners, political advocates. We really tried to get people from across the different spectrum of all the different things they might be doing in Chinatown. And questions really touched upon current perspectives on what was going on in SF. And also, after we went to all the different cities and after we also read through all these historical documents, we pulled out lists of proposals of things that we were sitting in different and seeing in different places and also things that we were reading. And we wanted to bring them forward to the focus groups, to these stakeholders who are currently extremely involved in Chinatown to see all of their thoughts and opinions on it. And so some of the questions you might see, I'm not going to read it all out to you, but I will give a few examples. Some of them asking like, what are the important pillars in Chinatown right now in San Francisco and what protects them in the community? And things like, who are the populations that we want to protect? Who are the populations we want to bring in? What are the challenges of being in Chinatown? Because we were asking, some of the folks that we were talking to were, for example, small business owners or also other social services. And then also after we shared all of our recommendations or proposals of different programs, we would ask them, which ideas from these other cities are most interesting to you? Like, what do you actually like? And then are there any ideas that you would actually like to bring into San Francisco's Chinatown? So really trying to get the full gamut of both what they are thinking about their current status and the current status of Chinatown and also their experiences in it, but also is looking and reflecting on what is happening across the continent, across all these different Chinatowns. And this is also just a list of all the folks that we talked to. So we talked to merchants, talked to large and small restaurants, small retail organizations, political organizations. That includes, the Chinatown Transportation Research and Improvement Project, Chinatown Trip, Rose Pack Dem Club, cultural groups like the Chinese Cultural Center, progressive organizations like Chinese Progressive Association, as per the name, Chinese for Affirmative Action, and then service providers like Self Help for the Elderly or Community Youth Center, and finally other tenant grassroots organizing groups like the Pingyuan Resident Improvement Association, otherwise known as PIREA, and the Single Room Occupancy SRO families. And then last, the fourth and important component of our research methodology was this community engagement session where we were really asking folks about their perceptions of Chinatown. And we, similarly to how we were talking about how the two corridors, Grant and Stockton, are really oriented towards different communities, Grant is more oriented towards the tourists, Stockton more oriented toward the residents. We wanted to ask distinct questions that also were oriented to different groups. And so we set up our community engagement pop-ups in both Stockton and in Grant. And the questions that we had to each of them were more specific and individual. And we just wanted to ask them about the state of what they were seeing. Like, what are they feeling and experiencing as folks who maybe are not as involved in the political scene as all the folks that we mentioned before, but what are they seeing day to day? And so we asked, like, for example, the residents on their perceptions of Chinatown, what was important to the local community, And when we asked it to them, we also asked them to write out their responses on these colorful little t-shirt cutouts that we had, because we wanted to also mimic and do a call out to all the laundry that we frequently see hanging out of the windows in Chinatown. So we were asking them about the perceived importance, for example, of the Stockton Street corridor, of where they likely were when we were talking to them, and also what they thought the future of Chinatown would look like in 10 years. And then who we also talked to in terms of tourist engagement folks or folks on Grant Avenue is we talked to them about what actually brought them out to Chinatown, like what were comparisons to San Francisco, some of the other Chinatowns they might have seen, very similarly to what we asked you. And then also what their interest in Grant Avenue, and what that corridor had to them. Were they actually interested in kind of the tourist trinkets that they were seeing? And also what sort of things would they like to see in Chinatown later on? So, and then after we had all these conversations with them, and after we kind of got to the end of all these methodologies, we put together um, all these various all these various things we heard in the proposals, and we came up with a long list of proposals. But I think it all leads as well to questions that I want to ask you, which is I want you all to think about a community that is really important to you in your life. And we can do one of those like very like McKinsey consultant, like close your eyes and imagine, think about what it might look like, but actually think about a community that is important to you. You just take a few moments. You can write it out in the chat as well if you are feeling so inspired. And as you're thinking about this community, thinking about what it feels like and what are the important memories you have, and also how it smells and how it looks, I would love to hear from you all. Like, what are the aspects of this community that you believe to be the most important? So thinking about, is it the other residents? Is it the neighbors that you grew up with? Is it, for example, the affordable housing that's affordable for everybody in the community, not just the folks who, are earning like a middle class amount of income? Is it like the grocery stores where you might get some culturally appropriate foods, and the grocery stories, as I wrote out here? And what are some proposals or initiatives that you have implemented or would implement to maintain these important community elements? So if you just wanted to take a moment and think about that. And if you also wanted to drop them in the chat as well, that is okay too. Essentially, these are the questions that we asked ourselves when we were coming up with like the big ground jewels of our corridor study report, which was all of these different proposals to implement in the community. And so I'm gonna pass it off to Christy to talk a little bit more about the actual proposals that we had in our quarter study report.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So I will talk about the proposals, but before we dive into the actual list, I want to talk about the process in which we came up with the proposals, because it was a very layered and deductive process. And as you can see on the next slide, perfect. So we initially came up with a list of proposals that we pulled from the document analysis that Amy talked about. And that's how we came up with number one, the initial list of proposals. And then as we moved on to the travel portion of our research, we kept this initial proposal list in mind and continued to pull out proposals from the interviews and conversations we had with different stakeholders and nonprofits over the course of our research trips. So this happened in Boston, this happened in Vancouver, in Philadelphia, Chicago, the other cities that you're here from. So then we added the information to that initial list. And then coming back home to San Francisco, we used that to adjust this list of proposals. And then as we began the focus groups portion of our research, we presented some of these initial proposals to our focus groups to ask them what they thought about it and adjusted it based on their feedback. And also from the focus groups, we amassed the bulk of our proposals there from the participation of the different stakeholder groups that we talked to. And then from the focus groups, the research trips, and the document analysis, we started to formulate number 3, which was this final list of proposals. But like Amy said, before we finalized it, it was really important for us to seek the truth and input in the community by getting feedback from the community engagement process that Amy talked about. So using the community engagement process, we adjusted the proposals that were recorded from the focus groups, the research trips, and the document analysis. And all of that is how we formulated this final list of proposals. And this diagram really tries to depict the way we came up with the proposals and show that it was a really deductive process, and that it came through these like various tiers. And you can visually see the different parts that went into the completed proposals. And it was a very layered and iterative process where each of the previous steps informed the following. Okay, so in the next slide, we are going to talk more about the actual proposal. So like I said, the proposals were created deductively, meaning that our 61 proposals, which I will paste into the chat right here. Okay, and if anything is not viewable, we'll send out all these links at the end, so don't worry about that. But these proposals that we collected, again, were sorted, cleaned, and analyzed in order to come up with the 7 themes. And again, this was deductive, meaning that after analyzing all 61 proposals, we came up with the 7 themes. And it's important to note that these proposals, some of these have already been implemented in San Francisco. During the 2-year-long course, we had 2-year-long process of writing, or these proposals were implemented in the other cities. And each of the proposals outlined in our quarter study report have very basic feasibility assessments that you can see in the chart. So there are criteria like physical requirements. Is there any additional infrastructure needed? Is there the physical space to actually implement this? What are the financial requirements? What capital needs to be generated for this to happen? And of course, political consideration. So identifying the correct agency, organization, or individual in the community to be the holder of this proposal and who has the expertise to execute these proposals. And we have these 7 different proposals. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go over 1 or 2 examples of each proposals. And in the interest of time, we're not going to read every proposal that falls into each category. But again, please do take a look at that table and the feasibility assessment in the report if you are interested. Okay, so the first proposal is bringing more people to Chinatown, bringing broader audiences to Chinatown. And one suggestion that came through was maintaining a prominent online presence that directs people towards events and other happenings in the neighborhood. This is not to say that there isn't currently an online presence. In fact, there are many, and that's sort of part of the issue that folks wanted to address, is that we have a variety of different like Instagram handles and websites that talk about the events in Chinatown, but not one consolidated list. And then another adjacent example of a proposal was wanting San Francisco Chinatown to work with San Francisco Travel to create campaigns that would draw people in the neighborhood right when they land at SFO. And also, lastly, to have a centralized resource for service providers in the community, meaning for folks who may no longer live in Chinatown, but still seek services or resources in the community, there's that one-stop shop that they can look at in order to know what is happening in the community. So that is the first proposal category we have, bringing more people to Chinatown. And then the second proposal category or theme we have is a nighttime economy. So building a more robust nighttime economy, and examples of proposals that fell under this theme were semi-permanent street closures. This would make it possible to hold recurring night markets. And recurring night markets, that last point you see, was something that came up so often during our focus groups, probably because it was happening right around the time that Be Chinatown, another nonprofit in SF Chinatown, was starting up their bi-monthly night markets. Other examples of proposals included more youth-friendly programming on top of the new Rose-Pak Central Subway station in Chinatown, and in general, more youth-friendly places at night, and also having ambassadors or folks to be able to escort youth home at night if the perception of safety was a concern for these youth. And then the third proposal theme is anticipating future challenges. So this one was a very resident-oriented, resident-centered proposal, resident-centered theme. And proposals that fell under this theme included identifying the increased costs of staying in Chinatown, whether that meant be the housing stock for residents, the resident-centered goods and services on Stockton Street, and also prioritizing resident-oriented initiatives in local decision-making. One example of that is something you see on the photo on that slide. So this was a resident and tenant visibility for an affordable housing measure on the primaries last March. And another proposal was continuing to identify any potential future hazards that will impact Chinatown. So in terms of ensuring that residents are able to stay in Chinatown, anticipating any future concerns about displacement to make sure that seniors and families are able to stay and age in place. So that's number 3. And the fourth proposal theme is small business preservation. So that's another resident-oriented theme here. Folks that we talked to in the community engagement, in the focus groups, and in the travel everywhere really agreed that it was important to preserve these anchor businesses such as grocery stores, fish markets, and these businesses are not necessarily what folks may consider like legacy business from an architectural standpoint, but these are the businesses that residents turn to because they offer goods and services that they are familiar with and the language that they are familiar with as well. And to preserve these small businesses, making sure that there's technical assistance in language and culturally appropriate business skills. And some other folks also mentioned that there'd be counseling about merchandising. And this was mentioned specifically regarding Grant Avenue, where a lot of merchants would place their merchandise under the sun and folks notice it would become faded. So again, very specific technical skills about marketing and merchandising their goods. Okay, and then the fifth theme is cultural heritage preservation. So these proposals included interpretation plans that would follow a physical path around Chinatown, incorporating more annual cultural festivals in the community, street fairs, and developing Chinatown as a historic district or cultural heritage district. So as you can see on the photo, this is 41 Ross's opening of their featured Artist in Residence program, an example of like activating the street via cultural heritage preservation. Number 6, the theme we have for workforce development. So proposals that fell under the workforce development theme include providing a culinary training program for local residents to be able to work as chefs and then be able to use that training to find work as a chef, incubator programs for small business owners that may not have the resources to open up their own brick and mortar, intergenerational small business training program that really seeks to address the succession of small businesses where the owner may age or retire, but not necessarily have family or individuals to pass the business on to, ensuring that the small businesses are able to continue being the neighborhood, and a consolidated employment resources center. And this was something that was brought up by a lot of folks who worked at direct service organizations in all Chinatowns, meaning that they wanted people in the community to be able to have a one-stop employment resources center where folks who are looking for work could see the breadth of jobs available in the neighborhood. Yes, very sad to hear that Samuel was closing. All the jobs available in the neighborhood in one location. And the last theme is strengthening and improving infrastructure. So this is an example of, or this is a meeting of tenants in Chinatown, and this is one room that they meet in, but one example, but one of the reasons why this theme was brought up is because a lot of the proposals address the fact that residents don't actually have sufficient spaces to gather for their meetings, and having a accessible community room for residents would be really important for them. Another very, I think, basic thing that a lot of folks who might not live in Chinatown take for granted is laundromats. So needing to have more laundromats and other basic needs met for residents. And then a consolidated list of service organizations, meaning that for people who work as direct service providers in the community, they're able to know what the landscape of service organizations in Chinatown looks like and to better increase communication among these service providers. So again, these are the 7 different themes we have. You can see on the left, and the proposals I just talked through were just a few examples of the 60 plus we have. So please do take a look at the report if you are interested. Okay, so research takeaways. We're going to talk a bit more about how we synthesize all these different parts that Amy talked about earlier. So in the next slide, you will see these 3 concentric circles or 3 overlapping circles. And as we started out doing document analysis, thinking about the master plan, going through travel, coming back to San Francisco Chinatown, engaging with the community and stakeholders, and then analyzing all this information, the sort of question we kept in mind from the beginning was, how does San Francisco Chinatown continue to sustain itself as both a vibrant immigrant gateway and also a heritage economy? So here we see these 3 overlapping circles that introduce the function of Chinatown as 1, a residential village, 2 as a capital city, and 3 as a tourist center. And these 3 functions were laid out by the master plan of 1987 and continue to underscore the preservation of the community today. So firstly, Chinatown as a residential village. And this was something that was reflected in the proposals where focus groups really emphasized the importance of protecting and anticipating future challenges. It's important to sustain the housing stock, and that includes providing housing counseling, eviction defense services, providing sufficient open space in names of parks such as Portsmouth Square, and also continuing supporting the service organizations, corridor regeneration of Grant and Stockton, and ensuring that there's people power in the community. Okay, and then the second is Chinatown as a tourist center. So as a tourist center, maintaining successful commercial corridors such as Grant Avenue and activating these spaces in a way that draws in these broader audiences and being able to ensure that the success of the commercial retail is able to help maintain the affordability of residential units in other parts of Chinatown. And lastly, we see Chinatown as a capital city. So Chinatown has long been a center for advocacy and political organizing in the community, also the broader San Francisco as well. And this last function is of special importance as we move into the phase of implementation for this project, phase 2. As with all the proposals that I just talked about, we will need community power. We need to leverage Chinatown's capital in order to bring these proposals into practice. And with these 3 overlapping circles, we can see that these mutually supportive functions really provide the social infrastructure that allows Chinatown to maintain itself as a vibrant, living, breathing immigrant gateway for working class households. Great, so next steps for this project. We move up to the next slide, thank you. So publicity and sharing our work, we've been really lucky in that we've been able to present at a few different conferences. The first was the National Capacity Coalition for Asian Pacific Americans and Community Development Convention in Chicago, and this was in June. And during this conference, we were paired with Welcome to Chinatown, a Manhattan, Chinatown-based incubator organization, and also the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community in Chicago as well, to talk about corridor regeneration economic development. And then just a few weeks ago in September, Amy and I were in Seattle to present at the API HIP, the Asian Pacific Islander Americans and Historic Preservation Conference, where we were once again paired with folks from Welcome to Chinatown to discuss how economic development can be really used as a tool for historic preservation. And we've also been able to receive coverage in some local news outlets as well, in both English and Chinese media, such as SF Examiner and also Singtao, World Journal, and KTSF. And I will just post some of these links in the chat too for folks who are interested in reading and watching. Some of them are in Cantonese, but there is an English language one. Ooh, excuse me. Okay, so that is publicity and how we've been able to share and disseminate our work. But of course, we've also been communicating individually with all the stakeholders we've interacted with, such as yourselves, folks from different organizations we've met while we traveled, and folks we connected with in the San Francisco community during our focus groups, as well to share the report and the other documents we've created. Okay, so next steps for us in terms of phase 2, we are really excited to begin conducting a feasibility study. And we touched on this a bit earlier when we talked about the feasibility assessment for the proposals, but this is really going to be a much more in-depth assessment of the conversations we had during the proposals of the financial constraints, the physical constraints, and the political constraints. And after we've conducted this feasibility study, we'll begin implementation. And in order for us to implement, we will also be coordinating across a variety of different organizations in Chinatown and San Francisco to ensure that the proposals and these newly implemented initiatives are going to be held by the most appropriate parties who have the capacity and the knowledge to execute. And also we are thinking of holding a small convening for the North American Chinatowns or other organizations we interacted with in our travels. So hoping to invite these other stakeholders for a hybrid type of convention sometime in early 2025 to have a few conversations on economic development as well. Yeah, those are our next steps. Thank you all for coming and everything. It was really great to talk with y'all, and I'm just going to drop a link of the report of our travel book and a one-pager we made for the press into the chat, and they should all be viewable. I'll pass it back to Amy.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Chrissy. Um, I guess this is just open time now. If there are any thoughts or any comments or questions from folks in the chat, we're really grateful that you were all able to join us today and hope that this was at least like a little bit, this helped with some reflections, um, showed some things that maybe you can bring back to your own communities and your own jobs. But please feel free to share any questions or comments. I think there should be a questions function at the bottom of the screen.
I saw that we had some questions from folks along the way. I think Doris asked about Grant and Stockton, and some other folks asked about the timeline too.
Mhm.
If Doris, you want to raise that again.
I see, Doris, your question was the division between the corridors intentionally planned this way at some point or just organically happened? Um, I actually don't know the answer to that question, and I think but I don't necessarily believe that it was intentionally planned that way, but I think that's something that maybe we can that is a really good question, and I think something that maybe we can get back to you and everybody else about. I think I have your email, but it is a really good question, and certainly it does. If you were to walk on the street now, you could definitely see that it looks something like it was intentionally planned. But considering how old Chinatown is, I don't necessarily think that that was the case. But we can definitely look a little bit more into that for sure. Um,
I think also just to jump onto that a bit, Grant Avenue, if like the architecture and some of like the more orientalized tourist facing elements are what you're talking about, sort of arose after the 1906 earthquake and fire, and some of you might know this from San Francisco, but the community or the city wanted to relocate Chinatown to Hunters Point, a different neighborhood, and a lot of local merchants, looked to Eli and other like folks gathered together to sort of create a plan of sorts to create Chinatown as like a tourist paradise, oriental looking place. So that's how Grant at least developed some of these features itself. And like Amy said, we're not exactly sure why Stockton was not chosen for that, but that at least is how that explains some of the like ornamentation on Grant.
Yeah, were there any other questions? I see, Jimmy, your comment. I thought the idea of showing ads at SFO was intriguing. Besides bringing in more people, are there better guides that can make visitors engage more with businesses? And so you're showing us an example. Can't quite see. Oh, I see. You're showing us like a map, essentially. Um, I think that is also a very good question. And actually, we had quite a few like business engagement type proposals in the broader table of proposals that we had. Um, I think like the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that we heard was just that there are a lot of these maps and resources and things that already exist out there, but the issue is that they weren't getting out to people, or nobody really knew like who owned what, or didn't really have like a lot of they weren't really shared that much amongst different people. And so that's why like a lot of the proposals that we heard was actually about coordinating and centralizing a lot of the resources that were available, because I think it was a matter of like there are a lot of them that are already out there, but they're just not being shared out with the right people. And also, one of the big things I think about with that particular section of the business development component is there actually is like a SF Chinatown website online, but when you just like Google like SF Chinatown, it looks like it hasn't been updated for a really long time. And so like the UX of the page is really old. A lot of the events are from quite a few years ago, but I don't think anybody really knows like who owns that page. I couldn't figure it out myself, and I asked a whole bunch of different people. Um, and so that those are some of the ideas definitely in terms of like having more folks engaging with the business. And actually in San Francisco's Chinatown on Kearney Street, there's actually like a Chinatown visitor center that's run by Singtao. Um, and I think the thing is like people just wanted people, and Singtao also has its own individual resources, but again, it was the whole issue of like there are a lot of smaller resources that are scattered about, but nothing that's like really centralized quite in the same way. Yeah, Chrissy, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. Oh, I think we got another question. The other Chinatowns, from Oscar, the other Chinatowns have questions for you at CCDC or in SF. They had a lot of questions. They had a lot of questions. I think something Amy and I noticed, like even at Capacity and other conferences, were that a lot of folks look to Chinatown and San Francisco as like a guide for where they want to be in the future. And it sort of made us realize that we really benefited from like a lot of advocacy and a lot of organizing that happened 30 plus years ago that allowed San Francisco Chinatown to have so much people power, really. Yeah, there are a lot of specific questions too. I don't know, Amy, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, there in particular, I don't know if y'all remember from earlier in the presentation, there was that when I was talking about like the Chinatown Master Plan from 1987 and a lot of previous reports that have been written, um, there were a lot of questions around like, oh, what like is your plan actually effective? Like, does it actually have any teeth? And I think like that question, people were in particular really interested in that question because our plan actually does have a lot of teeth and it has actually been able to stave off a lot of gentrification and displacement that you might otherwise see in a community like Chinatown, which is right beside the financial district, for example, and is now in like a place that is widely considered to be like hot real estate, which it wasn't 100 years ago. But a lot of the questions like Christy mentioned are really about like how were you able to stabilize and maintain a lot of the community in ways that a lot of the other Chinatown, a lot of the other Chinatowns are having difficulty? And it's exactly as Chrissy said, it was a lot of the advocacy. It was the foresight when like the whole ethnic studies movement, the I-Hotel eviction happened in like the 1970s, 1980s era, that there was a lot of organizing around actually like purchasing buildings, around organizing around like having the master plan that would actually stabilize and have all of these regulations and legislations that would help protect the community. So a lot of questions, definitely a lot of questions like that around like how did so much of what you've managed to do, how did you actually do it? And Chrissy and I can like relay stories and relay histories because unfortunately we weren't there exactly because a lot of it did actually happen such a long time ago before either of us were born, frankly. So those are definitely the nature of I think a lot of those questions. Um, and then I see Doris, I see that you've asked about not much mention about the Chinese benevolent associations and were they engaged and what is their role, if any, in this? Um, we really didn't talk that much to the family associations. Let me go back to like our big list of all the folks that we talked to. Oops. And a lot of them, the whole thing about like the benevolent associations, the family associations, is a lot of them are actually like captured by like the Chinatown Merchants Associations, and we did have conversations with a lot of folks in those groups. But um, I think Christy, was there anything that you wanted to add about that? Because I think we
No,
had a
I
few
think
things to say.
exactly what you said. I think actually Rosa, our team director, who we saw on one of the earlier slides, also mentioned that there is so much overlap between the benevolent association heads and the chamber and the merchant associations that it would be a lot of the same people in the same group, which I don't know if that's like similar to how it is in Vancouver, but that's kind of how it is currently in San Francisco right now, is what we've been told.
Yeah. And the merchants have quite a lot of political capital in the city and also in the community as well. So we were definitely sure to, I think, talk to a lot of those folks. Um, but yeah, I think it was definitely there. We do engage with like the family association like quite frequently and other different things. We just didn't necessarily like think it was useful to talk to them and then also talk to the merchant association. Mhm. Yeah. Were there, oh, and then Oscar, another question about how engaged are local financial institutions in any work around SF Chinatown, whether just providing basic bank accounts or small business loans, storefront renovation loans, or even other community activism. In Manhattan, Chinatown, for example, Abacus Federal Savings Bank has been very active in opposing the jail. Um, so in terms of like the smaller I can't say I know that much about the smaller institutions that are in the community, but actually with a lot of like the larger banks, there are quite a few like larger banks in Chinatown, and I think there's actually a really important like planning, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of like planning issues that happen around that because there's actually some legislation around the prevention of bringing in too many, of allowing too many like larger financial institutions to move into Chinatown just because of how close Chinatown is to the financial district and not wanting to allow the financial district to really encroach and start creeping into Chinatown. But in terms of like the smaller business institutions, I actually personally don't know a lot about that. And I think that is a really good question. I don't know if like we'll find some answers in your book, Oscar, which like feel free to promote in the comments. But it is a really good question. I do know that our org is like really CCDC itself is really involved in I think like larger um, CDFI advocacy and organizing, but I can't say I know too much about the local financial institutions. It's a really good question. Oscar, feel free to drop the link to your book in the chat. Were young people involved? Yes, they were involved, Helen. Um, we had conversations with folks from. A lot of the conversations we had with folks in the focus groups, for example, we did talk to folks who work directly with young people and also the community youth. What's the second C again, Chrissy? It's like community youth collaborative as well, organizers with them. And just some of the conversations we had. Well, I guess it also depends, like, what do you define as young? Like, are we talking folks 15 to 24? Yeah, I think some of the folks that we had conversations with, um, were in that age range. But and then also we had conversations with folks from like the community youth center and stuff like that. But maybe less, I'm realizing now, maybe less conversations directly with young folks in that sense. And that is something that we definitely could have done a little bit more of. Chrissy, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, you went to Boston with the youth team. It's something you've
That
done.
is so right.
Yeah, Amy, I wasn't there, but Amy and folks, when they went to Boston, brought the youth along. And it sounds like y'all had a lot of conversations, or you involved them in the visual analysis. Yeah.
Yes, I'm so sorry. We totally did. I'm having one of those days where I can't remember. Um, we did actually. So Chinatown CDC has a youth program, and members of our youth program. So these are folks, these are youth who are involved with the Chinatown alleyway tours. They came with us to go to Boston, and we met with folks in youth-related groups, I think in Boston if I believe. And they also went on like their own components. They did their own research. So in each of the city trips that we went to, we also did we had a level of like visual analysis where we went around and did some observations on the street. And so they also did their own observations and had conversations. And actually, when we were there in Boston, wow, I can't believe I totally forgot that this happened because it was like it was more than a year ago now at this point when we went to Boston, we it was like our team that we showed you before, and then it was also the youth team, and we were all in like a Airbnb rental together, which was not ideal. Um, Airbnb was not ideal. It was the only place that we could find that could fit that amount of people because there's about 10 or 11 folks. But a lot of the time, those conversations that we would have with them around planning, around what we saw in Boston, around what we're seeing in San Francisco, they would go into like 1 and 2 in the morning and mind you, like 1 or 2 in the morning is like only 10 or 11 Pacific Standard Time in San Francisco. But it was still like we would have a lot of like very deep and engaged conversations with them in terms of what kind of things we were seeing around displacement, around urban planning, and both of our respective communities. Um, and I think that, and a lot of their opinions, and a lot of the ways that they were thinking about doing this analysis in all these different cities, like was really, really, I think enriched a lot of the ways that we thought about and looked at all the different cities. So, for example, when we went to Boston, I actually deleted it off this presentation, but on previous presentations, I've included a boba count that the youth did, where they went around and they counted how many boba stores there were in Boston actually a really useful measurement because I think a lot of the times, boba stores are kind of associated with like a certain level of trendiness. And so I think they counted like more than 10 in Boston. And it was like their way of, I think, like using a scale that I feel like really appealed to them and help them do their analysis. And so it was a really great conversation. Yeah, Christy just posted their blog that they did, because they also visited a few other places in Boston as well. And then I see, Helen, your other question was about, in addition to focus groups, were there other fun and creative ways of engaging the community? So we did have the community engagement parts, which I guess we kind of folded under the focus groups a little bit, but the community engagements was literally like being on the street. We had these big poster boards. We have, as you can see, that's actually Christy in front of the fence right next to the Ping Yuan building where we would ask folks questions, they would write it down, and then they would pin it to the fence so that everybody could see and everybody could walk by and take a look at them. But we did have a lot of, I think, like really interesting ways of engaging in bringing up conversations with people. And so that was one of the other, yes, that was one of the other fun or engaging ways or fun and creative ways of engaging the community. Yeah. Totally, Doris. We love to have you there. It's great to chat. Are there any other questions or any comments? I think Chrissy and I are both going to leave our emails on here too. So if you also wanted to ask any additional questions or reach out to Chrissy or myself about the quarter study, about anything else, we'd be really happy to chat. I dropped both of our emails down in there, but just wanted to thank you all for coming today, taking little over an hour of your time to come and join us and hear about what we've been doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy and Christy. This is
Thank
awesome.
you. Awesome. Thanks all. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.